Section 51 of the Treasure Chest of My Bookhouse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Draconis. The Treasure Chest of My Bookhouse, edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. The Labors of Hercules, a Greek Myth. Among all the Greek heroes about whom the old Greek harpers sung, who was more dearly loved than Hercules? Hercules the patient, Hercules the strong. When Hercules was but a babe a few months old, his mother Alcmene left him once asleep in a brazen warrior's shield that served him for a cradle. There came creeping upon him while he slept 2 venomous serpents. Just as the snakes were about to strike, Hercules awoke. With a crow of delight, as though he had found a new plaything, and without a sign of fear, the little one seized the serpents, one in each hand. Straight by the neck he grasped them and held on tight. When his mother came in and found him thus, she was struck almost dumb at the sight. But the snakes were already strangled, and the infant Hercules safe. So began the strong man's conquests over evil. Hercules grew to manhood, possessed of marvelous courage and strength, and carefully trained in all that befitted a hero. One day, when he was still a youth, dwelling for a time among herdsmen on the mountains, he lay down in a lonely valley to sleep through the noonday heat. In his sleep he had a strange dream. He seemed to be following a path that suddenly split into 2, branching off in opposite directions, and he knew not which road to take in order to pursue his journey. One road looked broad and easy, and led down to a pleasant city, whence he saw the gleam of marble palaces mid green and tempting gardens. The other was steep and rocky. It was hard to climb, and led endlessly upward, growing rockier and rougher at every step, till it disappeared in the clouds. As Hercules stood hesitating which road to choose, there came dancing down the smooth and easy highway a gay and laughing maiden. She beckoned to him and called, "Come with me, Hercules, down into the pleasant city. There you need not labor all day long in the heat of the sun. You may sit continually in fragrant gardens, hearken to the plash of fountains and the songs of birds, and slaves will serve you with all you need." As Hercules looked toward the city, the piping of merry music faintly reached his ears to invite and tempt him still further. But lo! Just then in the second path appeared a second young maiden, quite different from the first. She wore plain white garments, and her eyes were grave, yet quiet, sweet, and calm. "My sister deceives you, Hercules," she said. "The pleasant things offered you down below are not worth the having. They are toys of which you will tire in a day, and must be bought with a price of which you little dream. Do not descend thither, but climb the mountain path with me. You will find it rough and difficult, 'tis true, yet breasting its heights you will there find real delights of which you can never tire. Moreover, if you have the courage to climb, this road will lead you to Mount Olympus itself, and there you shall live forever with the gods who cannot die." And then in his dream Hercules turned his back on the gay and laughing maiden, and took the mountain road. Thus did he choose the labors by means of which he turned his strength to good account for men. Now Hercules had a cousin named Eurystheus, king of Mycenae, who was a few days older than he. It had therefore been decreed that Hercules should be the slave of Eurystheus, and in all things serve and obey him, only on condition that he successfully performed 12 tasks that Eurystheus should set him, could he ever again be free. When Hercules presented himself at the court of King Eurystheus, he was already remarkable for his broad shoulders and the enormous muscles of his arms, while Eurystheus was miserably puny, timid, frail, and weak. When Eurystheus for the first time beheld his powerful cousin, he was terrified at his strength, and he resolved to set him the hardest and most dangerous tasks that wit of man could possibly devise. At this time, in a beautiful grove that surrounded the temple of Jupiter in Nemea, a fierce lion had its den. This lion was laying waste the whole countryside, so the people lived in constant terror of its ravages. The first task which Eurystheus set Hercules was to kill the Nemean lion. The young man set out with only his bow and arrows for weapons, but as he journeyed along, he found a sturdy olive tree by the roadside. With a single wrench, he pulled up the whole stout tree by its roots and made himself a club. As he drew nearer the lion's haunts, nowhere did he meet with man, woman, or child, for all had been so terrified that they kept within doors, leaving their flocks to its mercy. At length Hercules came to the beautiful grove by the temple of Jupiter, and there he watched all day long. Towards night the lion came creeping home to its lair. It was a tremendous creature, fierce and terrible. Hercules twanged his bow and sent an arrow flying. The arrow struck the beast, but so tough was its hide that the sharp point glanced aside and fell harmless. The lion snarled, showed its fierce teeth, and looked about for its foe. A second arrow Hercules shot, but it glanced aside like the first. Ere he could shoot a third, the lion had espied him. It crouched and sprang straight at his throat. Hercules knocked it aside with a powerful blow from his club. Then, as it rose, ramping and clawing the air, he seized its neck with both hands and hung on fast till he slew it. His first task thus accomplished, Hercules went back to Eurystheus, wearing the skin of the lion over his shoulder, while the head of the beast rested on his own, like a kind of helmet. Henceforth, Hercules was always to be distinguished by the lion's skin which he wore, and the enormous club which he carried. When he came in such fashion into Eurystheus's presence, the coward was as frightened as though he had suddenly seen the Nemean lion itself before him. Yet when he was somewhat calmed, he said, "Hercules has slain the Nemean lion, 'tis true. Still the lion was but a beast after all. I will send him now to dispose of a hideous monster." So he sent for Hercules and bade him kill the powerful Lernaean Hydra. This Hydra was a tremendous serpent with 9 heads, one of which was immortal and could not possibly be slain. It had its den near a fountain that supplied all the region about with water, and it drove the unfortunate peasants away, so they had no means whatever whereby to slake their thirst. Hercules took with him his young nephew Aeolus, and off they started. In an oozy, evil-smelling marsh they found the Hydra, twisting its 9 ugly heads in the air and breathing forth poison. Hercules made at it at once, but whatever he cut off a head, 2 grew in its place, so at every stroke it only became more formidable. "Ho, Aeolus, set fire to yon grove of trees," cried Hercules, "and keep me supplied with the burning brands." Then he applied a brand to the neck wherever he cut off a head, and so prevented the new heads from growing. At length the immortal head alone was left. This Hercules had cleaved from the body, but it still spit its venomous poison as fiercely as before. So Hercules rolled a huge rock over it and left it buried deep where it could never do further harm. Now when Eurystheus found that his cousin had slain the Hydra as well as the lion, he began to think there was no evil creature that Hercules could not kill. "But," he mused, "his third task shall be harder still. After all, it is no great task to kill. I shall bid him bring me alive the fierce Erymanthian boar." Accordingly, he gave orders, and off went Hercules as before. Straight to Mount Erymanthus he went and struggled long with the famous wild boar, but he caught him at length with his naked hands and brought him back on his shoulders. When King Eurystheus saw Hercules coming home with the boar alive on his shoulders, he was so badly frightened that he ran and jumped into a great bronze pot in one corner of his palace, pulling down the cover in haste to keep himself well out of sight. He did not run so quickly, however, but that Hercules caught just a glimpse of him as the cover went banging down. "Ho, ho!" he cried out gravely, but with a twinkling eye. "This pot is just the place in which to keep a boar that is like to tear men to pieces." And he quickly lifted the lid and popped in the boar on top of the king. Loud was the outcry, you may be sure, till Hercules dragged out the 2, the king in one hand, the boar in the other, both kicking, struggling, roaring. "His strength seems equal to any deed," said Eurystheus to himself. "Yet will I get the best of him this time by setting a task that demands not strength, but fleetness of foot and superhuman endurance." Then he summoned Hercules to him and bade him bring him alive the stag of Diana. This stag had often befooled the hunters of that region. It was most marvelously fleet of foot, and few had ever seen it, but report had said it had horns of gold and hoofs of brass. It could make the most wonderful leaps and was never wearied, no matter how long the dogs might have chased it. It had been seen browsing oftener than elsewhere close to the steps of Diana's temple, and many people believed it was under the protection of that goddess. So Hercules set out for the temple of Diana and watched and waited patiently. At last it appeared, the golden antlered creature, a sight of wondrous beauty. Every muscle a-quiver, it stood, cautious and alert, ready to dart away at the slightest whisper of danger. Hercules sprang towards it at once. It gave a mighty leap and made off, swift as the flying wind. But Hercules made after it, hot on its heels. Over hill, over dale it flew, through forest and meadow, over shallow stream and broad deep river, on and on and on. A whole year long it ran, over nearly the whole of Europe, and a whole year long Hercules followed, till at last he wearied it out, and it fled back, exhausted and panting, to seek shelter in Diana's temple. Even there Hercules would have seized it, but just then a flood of silver light shone gently around about, and there before him appeared a lovely lady in short white garments, with a bow and quiver at her back, and a half moon on her crown. It was Diana herself, goddess of the moon and of the chase, and to her the stag ran trembling. "You must not lay hands on this stag," she said. "It belongs to me. But return to King Eurystheus, and tell him how your endurance has wearied it out, and how but for me you would have had it. I promise you he shall consider that your fourth labor is accomplished." Now Eurystheus was almost at a loss how further to test such a Hercules, but he thought, "I have tried his strength, his endurance, and agility. I will now try his wits, and send him on an adventure that only devising of some skillful plan can ever accomplish." In the valley of Stymphalus there had come an enormous flock of strange birds that did great damage to crops and herds, and even carried off children. These birds had claws of iron and feathers of metal, sharp at the end, which they had the power of throwing down on their enemies. No fleetness of foot, endurance, or bodily strength could dispose of such foes as these, that could not be prevented from darting up into the air out of reach. So Eurystheus bade Hercules save the valley of Stymphalus from these ugly birds. Hercules wisely decided at once not to fight with such creatures. Instead, he went quietly into the deep dark wood where they had their nest by the side of a noisome pool. Holding his bronze shield above his head to protect himself from their feathers, he rang a great bell, and at the same time beat on his shield with his lance. Frightened at this hideous noise, the birds flew up in such numbers that they darkened all the sky. As they flew over Hercules' head, their feathers fell fast like hail on his shield. But he continued to ring the bell and beat the shield till every one of the birds had disappeared from the place, so frightened by the noise that none ever dared return. Thereafter Eurystheus set Hercules 5 well-nigh impossible labors more. First, he must clean out in one day the filthy stables of King Augeas, wherein the king had kept 3,000 oxen for 30 years without ever cleansing their stalls. The refuse was piled mountain high, but Hercules dug a trench, turned the waters of 2 great rivers through the stables, and cleaned them thoroughly in one day. Then he must fetch to Mycenae alive the raging white bull of Crete. But he seized it by its horns and held it so firmly in spite of its terrible struggles that the bull saw it had met its master and followed him like a lamb. For his 8th labor he captured the savage man-eating horses of King Diomedes. For the 9th he brought back the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, a fierce tribe of warlike women who were never defeated in battle. For the 10th he overcame the giant Geryon with his 3 great bodies, his 3 great heads, and 6 arms that waved like a windmill. When Hercules always succeeded, his cousin was in despair. For his 11th labor, Eurystheus set him what he deemed the most impossible task of all. He bade him never again show his face in Mycenae unless he brought back 3 golden apples from the garden of Hesperides. For he knew full well that no man on earth knew where to find that garden. But Hercules would not be daunted. He set out to westward where the sky glows golden at sunset. There, thought he, behind that golden gate should lie such a garden of golden fruit. He journeyed long and he journeyed far, but at last he came to a beautiful spot on the banks of a river, where a band of graceful river nymphs played hide and seek amid the rocks. As soon as they perceived the hero, they ran laughing, with ropes of flowers, to seize him and make him their prisoner. Then they led him into a shady beech grove, where they bade him sit on a grassy knoll, and offered him refreshment of luscious purple grapes. But Hercules would not linger. He begged the nymphs to tell him where lay the garden of Hesperides, of which he was in search. "You must seek out Proteus, the old man of the sea," they told him. "He knows every land whereon the ocean laps, but he will never tell you this secret unless you compel him. You must catch him and hold him fast, no matter what may happen, until he tells you the truth." Thanking the nymphs for their kindness, Hercules again set out. He followed the river on and on till he heard the mighty boom of the sea. Then he advanced cautiously to the shore, and there he saw, fast asleep, lulled by the roar of the waters, a little old man whose hair and beard flowed down like a tangle of seaweed. Here for certain was the old man of the sea himself, and no doubt at all about it. So Hercules stepped forward, quickly seized him by an arm and a leg, and held him fast. "Tell me," he cried, "where lies the garden of Hesperides?" Proteus awoke in a fright, and the next instant Hercules found he was holding in his hands no little old man, but a struggling stag. The change was astounding enough, but still Hercules held on tight. Then the stag became a seabird, screaming to be free. The seabird changed to a fierce three-headed dog, the three-headed dog to a savage giant, the giant to a monstrous snake. But the more terrifying were the forms which the old man assumed, the tighter Hercules held him. At last, perceiving that Hercules could not be frightened into letting him go, Proteus appeared in his own rightful form once more and told him the truth. "Go down into Africa," he said, "where the giant Atlas holds up the sky, and Atlas will get the apples for you." So Hercules set out for Africa, but he had scarcely touched the African shore when he was attacked by the terrible giant Antaeus, who let no man pass him alive. This giant was son of the earth, and the most difficult of all giants to conquer, for whenever he was knocked down, he gained fresh strength from the dust and sprang up stronger than ever. But Hercules, knowing it was from the earth his strength had come, lifted him high above his head and held him there, struggling and kicking, separated from the source of his power, till the life was crushed out of him. Then he went again on his way. Being wearied somewhat by the struggle, he soon lay down for a little rest and fell asleep. Suddenly he awoke, feeling as if he had been stung by 1,000 insects. As he sat up and rubbed his eyes, what should he see about but a multitude of pygmies, tiny people no larger than bumblebees, who had climbed up over his body and attacked him with their tiny bows and arrows. Another man might have been angered by their little teasing stings, but Hercules only laughed with a loud resounding guffaw, whereat the pygmies all ran away, save a very few that Hercules caught in his hand and tied up in a corner of his lion skin to take back home to Eurystheus. After this, Hercules wandered on and on till he saw looming up before him a mountain, it looked to be, yet it was only a giant so tall that the clouds hung about his face like a beard and drifted around his shoulders. He was holding up his hands, and on these and his head he bore the blue dome of the sky. At last, here was Atlas, and Hercules, nothing daunted by the fearful weight of the heavens, under which even Atlas groaned, offered to relieve the giant by bearing the burden himself, if Atlas would get for him 3 golden apples from the garden of Hesperides. Atlas was more than willing, for the nymphs who guarded the apples were his nieces, and to him the adventure was nothing more than a holiday. So Hercules climbed a mountain nearby to be of the giant's height, took the sky on his shoulders, and bore its tremendous weight, while Atlas went off for the apples. In due time, back came the giant, but so much had he enjoyed his holiday that he sought by a trick to give Hercules the slip and leave him forever with the sky on his shoulders. Hercules saw through the trick, however, outwitted the clumsy fellow, and made safely off with the apples. Now that Hercules had accomplished 11 of the 12 labors, Eurystheus was beside himself. He could think of only one task more that it seemed no man could ever achieve. He would send Hercules down into the underworld, the dark and gloomy abode of Pluto, to bring thence the hideous three-headed watchdog Cerberus. Who that had entered those gloomy gates had ever been known to return? This would of a certain be the end of Hercules, for here, men said, was the abode of death. Hercules journeyed away till he came to a deep chasm between two black and frowning rocks. Far, far below gleamed waters black as ink, and now and again strange rumblings as of thunder shook the earth. Here was the only entrance to the underworld. Still Hercules knew no fear. Down into the deep black hole he climbed. There before him, guarding the way, he saw Cerberus, with his three savage heads and his tail like a snake. The dog let him enter readily. It would be when he sought again to go out that the creature would make at him. Straight to Pluto's throne, through the dark and dreary shadows, went Hercules, without once turning aside. Of Pluto himself he demanded permission to carry his watchdog back to Mycenae. Pluto was struck with his daring.
"Hercules,"
said he,
"you have done and suffered much, and proved yourself a true hero. Go, therefore, you shall take my watchdog back, if you can conquer him bare-handed."
So Hercules returned once more to the gate. There stood Cerberus, no more quiet, but bristling with rage, showing his savage teeth, and crouching, ready to spring. Hercules lost no time. He seized the dog on the spot with his vice-like grip, and dragged him straight off to Eurystheus. When Eurystheus saw this remarkable sight, when he saw that Hercules had conquered even death, and come back from that underworld whence men said none could ever return, he at once set his cousin free. At length the terms of his bondage had all been fulfilled. Nevertheless, Eurystheus strictly forbade Hercules ever again to enter the gate of Mycenae. Thereafter, Hercules, now at last his own master, wandered over the earth, ridding the world of many a monstrous evil, and doing mighty deeds for the good of all mankind. When the end of his earth journey came, he laid himself down on a funeral pyre, and bade men set it aflame. Bright, purifying flames sprang, leaping up about him. All that could ever die they burned away. Then the real Hercules, the immortal Hercules, came out from the fire, all shining and glorious. A rainbow appeared in the sky. Lo! It was Iris's bridge that led from earth to heaven. A moment after the clouds broke away, Iris in all her shimmering colors appeared, and Mercury with his winged shoes. Over the rainbow bridge they led the immortal Hercules, as the maid of his dream had promised, to Mount Olympus itself, there to live forever among the gods with all who are truly heroes. End of section 51. Recording by Draconis. The Real Basement Dwellers Podcast. Willworkformoney.net.